Home visits are an opportunity to visit a new student in their home and meet them and their family in their own environment. It does take some time, but it's really worth the time investment because you get to know the child and the parent, and it builds trust. Even in parent-infant, where they're not separating, it's still worth it to do the home visit. You just don't get to know the parents or the child in the same way if you don't do the home visit. So 3 or 4 weeks before the child is starting in the program, contact the parent. This is a family that's already enrolled. Don't do a home visit until they're enrolled, because sometimes they don't enroll, even if they say they're going to. Let them know that you will be planning to make a visit, see if they have any initial questions about the class, and then make plans to visit within a week of when the child will be starting in class, so that the child remembers you when he or she comes to class. When you're making the appointment, it's important to let parents know that you're not there to evaluate their child or the environment. You're not there to judge their home or their parenting. It's really just an opportunity to meet them and get to know them. And it does make sense. It will make sense to the parents. Some have never heard of this. They might be reluctant, but the vast majority of parents have welcomed me to do home visits. There were maybe 2 or 3 people in 30 years who canceled and then canceled again and just really didn't follow through on the home visit. But the vast majority did, and I could tell that they appreciated getting to know me better. You could, when you make the visit, bring a gift of a photo book. This has worked really well, and actually for toddlers and early childhood also. We made little books that had a photo of each teacher, the door you enter when you're arriving, the place where you hang your coat, and a few of the interesting materials. Perhaps the pet, if there's a classroom pet, like we had Chewy the bunny, so there was a picture of Chewy in the little book. We just printed these little books out and laminated them, and we brought them as a gift on the home visit. This was helpful because if there were several days before the child was coming to school, the parent would read this little book several times. We put short text on each page that the parent could read, so they could read this book over and over again. Little children like the same book 100 times. That helps them start to think about going to school. You could also bring a material with you for the child to try. The home visit lasts up to an hour. I know some people do shorter visits, but to me an hour seems about right because I do have a lot of questions, and I'll be sharing those questions with you in a few moments. You will have the form for this, so that you can ask the same questions and write them on this form if you like. You may also change it. First, you'll want to make a note of who's present for the home visit. Hopefully you're meeting at least one of the parents, possibly both. Maybe there's a nanny or a grandparent who's involved. So make a note of who you met at the home visit. I ask a series of questions, and the order does make a difference. First, I ask them to please tell me about your child's personality and interests. Now, if the child's 6 weeks old, they may not know much yet, but maybe they already have a sense of the personality a bit. But if they're a little bit older, the parent may have a lot to tell you about the child. I sometimes found that children were different than their parents described them. Maybe they were different at school. Anyway, they get to share about their child, and you get an idea of their judgment of the child. If they think this is a strong-willed child or an easy child, you just wonder what they're going to say. Then the second question I ask, and this is really the important one, please tell me about your pregnancy and the birth of this child or the adoption. This is a story to tell. This is the story of how they got this child. For most of them, it's a very meaningful story. I will say that there were a few parents that just said something very brief like, oh, it was fine. And they really didn't want to talk about it. It could be that it was traumatic. Sometimes a pregnancy and a birth can be traumatic, certainly. So maybe that's why. I don't really know. But most people love to tell this story, and they're glad that you care. They love it, that you're interested, and they enjoy telling this story. You can prompt them a bit and ask some questions if they need a little support in telling this story. But it takes you from being a stranger to being someone close to them. They've shared a very personal story. I always say it's a really good first date. You know, when you tell each other about your lives and share a little bit that's personal, not everything, but a little bit, and you feel connected. Well, before this question, we're not connected, and after this question is answered, we are connected. It works so well. Plus, you need these details anyway, because if there's a difficult pregnancy or a difficult birth, or the child's premature, or there was a diagnosis when they were born, you need to know these things. So you have to be asking anyway. It's a great opportunity, though, to bond, and then they trust you. And if you are working in a class that requires separation, not parent-infant, but maybe infant care or toddler or early childhood, and the child will be dropped off, this is so necessary. There is no reason that they should be going through a difficult separation when you could make it better by doing this home visit. The next question I usually ask is about nutrition and breastfeeding, bottle feeding. Have they used a cup yet? Have they taken a liking to certain foods? Have they used utensils? How independent are they in eating? Because many parents will feed the child, spoon feed the child, and they may have not had the opportunity to feed themselves yet, so that's all right. Are they using a pacifier, or do they have some other attachment object? This would be like a special blanket or a special stuffed animal, or sometimes it's just some odd thing. You never know what it might be, but we want to know if there's something important like that. The child may want to bring it to school, and you can decide how you want to handle that. I find those things to be a distraction, but then on the other hand, I think some children need them for calming, so it's case by case. You'll have to decide about that. I would try and wean them away from it if they are bringing it. I can remember that I observed for a year or two about these attachment objects, and some children really couldn't work because they always had the object in their hands. It really prevented them from working with their hands. Also, some children who have a pacifier, they aren't able to communicate. As it's time for them to be speaking words, they're not able to do that. We'll talk about this again in food and nutrition. But anyway, you want to know the status right now. What are they doing right now in their home? So you ask about that at the home visit. Also, as you're asking these questions, the parents kind of wonder why these certain questions are important. There's some things you ask and there's some things you don't ask. Are there any allergies or foods to avoid? Have there been any serious illnesses, surgeries, hospitalizations? Please describe the child's development so far. That's interesting to hear, and you want to know, is it pretty much like the normal child development, or is there something happening that's very different Remember, parents usually don't know child development, so they may not know how their child compares to other children. Describe your child's sleep habits. We want to know how that's going, and we'll be teaching about sleep in the parent discussion, so we want to know a little bit about the status of that and where is the child sleeping. Are they sleeping in the parent's bed, next to the parent's bed, in a low bed, in a crib? There are many possibilities, and some children are switching location during the night. You want to get a sense of what that is. Now, at the home visit is not the time that you're going to discuss these issues in depth. You're just there to learn more, and you can make your notes, and then when you have this topic in discussion in a few weeks or a few months, the parents need that. How do they need help with these issues? We ask what the other routines of the day are, who has cared for the child other than the parents, who has the most contact. Sometimes there's a nanny who has the most contact. Are both parents around frequently, or does somebody travel all the time? We want to know who the constant adults are in the child's life. Usually we assume a parent will bring the child to parent-infant, but sometimes they want the nanny to bring the child or a grandparent. I really want the parent coming at least some of the time because our purpose is parent education. So maybe they could switch off with the nanny or something like that. Ask if there are any unusual circumstances in the child's life. Is there anything that you should know? Because every now and then something is a big deal. There was one child who was being raised by her grandparents, so that was an unusual circumstance. So you never quite know. Once when I asked about health conditions, the mother said, my child's already had 12 surgeries, and the child was 18 months old. So you never quite know what they're going to say. I also ask, what are your hopes and expectations for our Montessori program? Now, this can clue you in if they have expectations that line up with what we provide, or are their expectations not a good fit? If they're expecting that their child will read at age 2, I did have one child who could read at age 2, and then all the other parents wondered why their child couldn't read. So they don't know development necessarily. They may have unreasonable expectations. As they learn about the classroom and the activities, we want to figure out up front, if we can, if it's not a good fit. Every now and then there's a parent who says, no, my child can't work with the water. I don't want him to get wet. No, my child can't go outside. So that's not going to be a good fit in Montessori. It's important to hear about those expectations. I wouldn't necessarily tell them that they are unreasonable, but this is all information that is useful down the road as you're doing parent discussions. You can address some of these issues. And if they ask, what do you think of his bedroom? Or what do you think of the house? What would you change? What toys would you add? I don't do any of that at the home visit because this is a time for us to connect. And if I start to say, well, you shouldn't have that crib and he shouldn't be drinking from that bottle anymore, they feel judged. We have to be really careful when we're going into the home that we're not judging. And in fact, all the time, not judging, because they will feel it. They will feel judged and it breaks the relationship. We're trying to build relationships. Everybody has a reason for the things they do. We just may not know what it is. So we're hoping to have the opportunity for parent education, and we can affect how they're living their lives. We can affect how they're parenting their child. So that's our hope. This is just an opportunity to greet them and get to know them and build their trust. When you do the home visit, they trust you so much more. And it helps the relationship from that point forward, not just with you as the first teacher, but with all of their years that they're at Montessori. They just trust the school more. They trust the teachers more. So it's well worth your time. It also prevents problems, and I believe in preventing problems. Let's have fewer problems. When they trust you, they don't question you as much. You know how parents can doubt what we're doing and question what we're doing and even criticize what we're doing because they don't understand. If they trust you more from the beginning, you don't get all those doubts and questions. Really worth investing your time to do the home visits. Okay. Now on to our next topic.